The explosion tore through Commander Vex Shadowfang's fighter ship like a hungry beast. Metal screamed and twisted as his vessel spun out of control through space. Warning lights flashed red across his control panel while smoke filled the cockpit. His powerful hands gripped the flight controls, but nothing responded. The ship was dying and taking him with it. Vex was a warrior of the Lupin Coalition, a species that looked like giant wolves who walked on two legs. His gray fur was marked with battle scars from dozens of fights. His yellow eyes had seen countless enemies fall before him. He was known throughout the galaxy as a fighter who never backed down and never asked for help. The Lupins believed that strength was everything and weakness meant death. The planet below grew larger in his broken view screen. Haven's Rest was a small human colony world on the edge of known space. Vex had been chasing enemy raiders when they ambushed him near this worthless rock. Now his ship was falling toward the surface like a burning meteor. He tried to activate the emergency systems, but half his controls were dead. The other half sparked and smoked. His spine felt wrong. Pain shot through his back and legs with every movement. Something was badly damaged inside his body, but he pushed the thought away. Warriors did not think about pain. They endured it and kept fighting. But his legs would not move properly when he tried to work the manual controls. Fear crept into his mind like a cold shadow. The ground rushed up fast. Vex managed to fire one last burst from his emergency thrusters. It slowed the crash just enough to keep him alive. His fighter slammed into a rocky hillside with tremendous force. The impact threw him against his restraints so hard that darkness swallowed his vision. Jake Martinez was checking his crops when he saw the fireball streak across the morning sky. The human farmer dropped his tools and ran toward where the object had crashed. Smoke rose from behind the hills near his property. His military training from years ago kicked in. Someone might need help. Jake was not a big man, but he was strong. From years of farm work. His brown hair was turning gray at the edges and lines marked his face from long days in the sun. He had come to Haven's Rest to build a quiet life after serving in the Colonial Marines. The small farming community suited him fine. Most days nothing exciting happened, and that was exactly how he liked it. He grabbed his medical kit and emergency tools from his truck. The drive to the crash site took 10 minutes across rough ground. When he finally reached the wreckage, his heart sank. The ship was completely destroyed. Twisted metal and burning fuel were scattered across a wide area. No one could survive a crash like this, but then he heard a low growling sound from the largest piece of wreckage. Jake approached, carefully with his rifle ready. Pirates and raiders sometimes use this area to hide from colonial security. The growling got louder as he got closer. It sounded like an injured animal, but there was something intelligent about it. Jake climbed over broken hull plates and found a hole torn in the side of the cockpit. Inside, he could see movement in the shadows. His flashlight beam revealed something that made him stop breathing for a moment. A massive Volf-like creature was trapped in the pilot seat. The alien was easily 8 feet tall with gray fur matted with blood. Its yellow eyes glared at him with pure hatred. The creature tried to snarl and snap at Jake, but it was clearly hurt badly. Its legs were twisted at wrong angles and dark blood soaked through its military uniform. This was a Lupin warrior. Jake had heard stories about them during his military service. They were supposed to be the most dangerous fighters in the galaxy. This one looked like it was dying. Jake should have walked away. Lupins were enemies of humanity in most sectors. They raided human colonies and took slaves. This warrior had probably killed humans before. The smart thing would be to let it die and report the crash to colonial security. But Jake could not watch any living thing suffer like this. He put down his rifle and held up his empty hands. The Lupin tried to growl again, but it came out weak and broken. Jake spoke in a calm voice like he was approaching a wounded animal on his farm. He did not know if the alien understood human speech, but tone was universal. Getting the Lupin out of the wreckage took 2 hours. Jake had to cut through twisted metal with his plasma torch while the alien watched him with suspicious eyes. Every time Jake got close, the creature would try to bite or claw at him, but its movements were getting weaker. Blood loss was taking its toll. When Jake finally freed the warrior from the cockpit, the alien tried to crawl away on its own. Its legs would not work properly, and it collapsed after moving only a few feet. The proud creature lay in the dirt making low whimpering sounds that it tried to hide. Jake could see the shame and anger in its yellow eyes. He knew he should call for help, but the nearest medical facility was 3 hours away. The Lupin would be dead by then. Jake made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He activated his truck's emergency medical pod and began loading the wounded alien inside. The warrior tried to fight him even while bleeding to death. It spoke in its own language with words that sounded like angry barking. Jake did not understand the meaning, but he recognized the tone. The alien was telling him to leave it alone. It would rather die than accept help from a human. Jake ignored the protests and sealed the medical pod. The automated systems began working to stabilize the warrior's condition. Basic scans showed severe spinal damage and internal bleeding. This creature needed real medical care fast. Jake drove toward the colony as quickly as the rough roads would allow. Lisa Park was the best doctor on Haven's Rest, but she had never treated a Lupin before. When Jake carried the unconscious warrior into her clinic, she stared in shock. Most colonists had never seen one of these aliens up close. They were much larger and more intimidating than humans expected. Lisa ran every scan she could think of. The damage was extensive. The warrior's spine was fractured in multiple places. Even if it survived, it might never walk normally again. For a creature whose entire culture was based on physical strength, this was worse than death. Lisa looked at Jake with serious eyes and told him the truth. She could keep the alien alive, but its fighting days were over. Jake nodded and told her to do whatever she could. He would take responsibility for the warrior's care. Lisa warned him that this decision could bring trouble. Lupins were proud creatures who did not accept charity. This one might try to kill Jake when it woke up, but Jake had made his choice. He would not abandon the wounded creature no matter what species it was. That was not who he was as a person. The unconscious Lupin lay on the medical table looking smaller and more vulnerable than any human had ever seen one of its kind. Its powerful body was broken, but it was still breathing. Jake sat in a chair beside the table and began planning how to care for a creature that would probably hate him for saving its life. Vex woke up 3 days later in pain and confusion. The room around him was too small and smelled wrong. Everything was built for creatures much smaller than him. His yellow eyes searched the unfamiliar space while his mind tried to remember what had happened. The crash came back to him in pieces, along with the horrible memory of being helpless. He tried to sit up, but his body would not obey. His legs felt distant and strange, like they belonged to someone else. Panic shot through him as he realized the truth. He was paralyzed from the waist down. A Lupin warrior who could not walk was no warrior at all. He was nothing. The door opened and Jake entered carrying a tray of food. Vex immediately tried to attack him, but his claws barely reached the edge of the bed. Jake set the tray down safely out of range and spoke in that same calm voice from the crash site. Vex did not understand the human words, but the tone made him even angrier. This small, weak creature was treating him like a helpless animal. Jake had converted his guest room into a medical care area. The bed was reinforced to hold Vex's weight, and medical equipment lined the walls. He had spent the last 3 days learning everything he could about Lupin biology from the colony database. Most of it was military intelligence, but it gave him the basics of what Vex would need to survive. Vex refused to eat the food Jake offered. In Lupin culture, accepting charity was a sign of complete weakness. He would rather starve than show such disgrace. Jake tried different approaches, but the warrior turned his head away from every meal. His yellow eyes burned with hatred and shame. On the 4th day, Jake brought Lisa to check on their patient. She ran new scans and confirmed what they both feared. The spinal damage was permanent. Advanced surgery might help Vex regain some movement, but he would never be the fighter he once was. When she explained this to Jake in simple terms, Vex seemed to understand, even though she spoke human language. His ears drooped and his proud shoulders sagged. Lisa left them alone, and Jake sat in his usual chair beside the bed. He began talking to Vex about his own experiences with injury. During his military service, Jake had been wounded in an explosion that left him unable to walk for months. The doctor said he might never be fully mobile again. The fear and anger he felt during that time nearly destroyed him. Vex listened despite himself. There was something in the human's voice that spoke of real understanding. Jake described the long, painful process of learning to walk again. He talked about the shame of needing help with basic tasks and the frustration of feeling useless. These were emotions Vex knew well. Jake rolled up his sleeve to show Vex the scars on his arm where metal fragments had torn through muscle and bone. He explained how other humans had cared for him when he could not care for himself. Their help did not make him weak. It made him grateful and determined to recover. This concept was foreign to everything Vex had been taught, but something about it made sense. The breakthrough came on the 6th day when Vex finally accepted water from Jake's hands. He was desperately thirsty, and his pride could not overcome his body's needs any longer. Jake helped him drink without making it seem shameful. He treated the act like it was normal and necessary rather than a sign of failure. Food came next. Jake had learned to prepare raw meat the way Lupins preferred it. He cut it into pieces small enough for Vex to eat with dignity. The warrior ate slowly, while watching Jake for any sign of mockery or pity. He found neither. Jake simply made sure his patient had what he needed and then gave him space. Amy Foster visited during the 2nd week to take measurements of Vex's body. She was the colony's chief engineer, and Jake had asked her to design mobility aids for their unusual patient. Vex growled at her when she got too close, but Amy was not intimidated. She had worked with dangerous machinery her whole life, and one injured alien did not scare her. Amy explained her plans while she worked. She would build a wheelchair designed for Vex's size and weight. Later, she might be able to create an exoskeleton to help him stand and move around. Her enthusiasm for the technical challenges made Vex curious despite his anger. No one had ever worked so hard to help him before. The other colonists were less welcoming. Many of them had lost friends and family to Lupin raids over the years. They understood Jake's compassion, but they questioned his judgment. A few demanded that colonial security be notified about the alien warrior in their midst. Jake refused to betray Vex's location and trust. Mayor Don Collins visited to discuss the situation. He was a practical man who understood both sides of the conflict. The colony could not harbor an enemy warrior indefinitely, but they also could not abandon an injured refugee. He agreed to give Jake more time to figure out a solution as long as Vex remained peaceful. Vex began to observe human behavior with growing confusion. These creatures did things that made no sense according to Lupin logic. They spent time and resources helping someone who could never repay them. They showed kindness to an enemy who had probably killed their kind in the past. They worked together without clear dominance, hierarchies, or constant fighting for status. Jake brought books and entertainment devices to help Vex pass the long hours of recovery. Most human media was incomprehensible to him, but he found some military history interesting. The accounts of human battles showed a species that fought with courage and intelligence. They were not the weak prey animals that Lupin propaganda described. The hardest moments came when Vex tried to perform basic tasks on his own. Using the bathroom required Jake's help, and assistance with washing was humiliating beyond words. Every day brought new reminders of his dependence and weakness. Several times he begged Jake to let him die with whatever honor he had left. Jake always refused these requests with quiet determination. He explained that life had value beyond physical strength. Humans cared for their elderly and disabled because wisdom and experience mattered as much as fighting ability. This idea was revolutionary to a creature raised in a society where the weak were culled from birth. Slowly, Vex began to see Jake not as a captor or a fool, but as something else entirely. The human showed strength through gentleness and power through service. He asked for nothing in return except that Vex continue living and healing. This type of relationship had no equivalent in Lupin culture, but Vex found himself respecting it. One evening, Jake fell asleep in his chair after a long day of farm work and patient care. Vex watched the exhausted human and felt something he had never experienced before. Gratitude mixed with protective instinct created a new emotion that had no name in his language. For the first time he began to understand what Jake meant when he talked about different kinds of strength. The warrior, who had never accepted help from anyone, was learning to depend on the kindness of a human farmer. It went against everything. He believed about himself and his people, but he could not deny the results. He was alive and healing because Jake chose to care for him. That simple fact would change everything he thought he knew about weakness and strength. 3 months after the crash, Amy finally finished building Vex's first mobility device. The wheelchair was a masterpiece of engineering designed specifically for his massive frame and unique anatomy. She had reinforced every joint and added controls that his clawed hands could operate easily. When she wheeled it into Jake's house, Vex stared at it with mixed emotions. The chair represented both freedom and permanent acceptance of his disability. In Lupin society, using such a device would mark him as permanently broken and worthless. But here on this human world, it meant independence and dignity. Jake helped him transfer from the bed to the chair for the first time. The sensation of moving under his own power again brought tears to Vex's yellow eyes. Jake had been working harder than ever to maintain both his farm and Vex's care. The human was exhausted most days, but he never complained or made Vex feel like a burden. He had modified his entire house to accommodate the wheelchair, including building ramps and widening doorways. Every change cost money and time that Jake could barely afford. Vex began to venture outside in his chair to watch Jake work in the fields. The sight of crops growing in neat rows fascinated him. Lupins took what they needed through conquest, but humans created abundance through patience and planning. Jake explained how different plants required different care and how the soil had to be prepared for each growing season. This kind of thinking was completely foreign to Vex's military mind. The colony's children were the first to accept Vex completely. They had no fear of him and asked endless questions about his appearance and his homeworld. Vex found himself enjoying their curiosity and innocence. Young minds had not yet learned to hate based on species differences. He began telling them stories about distant planets and alien cultures he had encountered during his military campaigns. Dr. Lisa visited regularly to monitor Vex's progress and adjust his medications. She was amazed by how well he was adapting to his new circumstances. Most humans with similar injuries went through long periods of depression and anger. Vex had those moments too, but Jake's steady support helped him work through them faster than anyone expected. Amy started working on plans for an exoskeleton that would allow Vex to stand and walk short distances. The project was incredibly complex and would take months to complete. She showed Vex the preliminary designs and explained how mechanical muscles would support his damaged spine. The technology was far beyond anything the Lupin military possessed. Vex began contributing to the colony in small ways. His military knowledge proved valuable when planning security improvements around the settlement. He identified weak points in their defenses and suggested better patrol routes. The colonists were initially suspicious of advice from a former enemy, but results spoke louder than prejudice. Jake taught Vex basic human customs and social interactions. Simple things like saying please and thank you were completely foreign concepts to someone raised in a warrior culture. Lupins took what they wanted and gave orders to subordinates. They did not ask politely or express gratitude for services rendered. But Vex found these human behaviors strangely appealing. The breakthrough in their relationship came during a severe thunderstorm that knocked out power across the colony. Jake was struggling to secure his farm equipment in the wind and rain when emergency sirens began wailing. A mudslide had trapped several colonists in the mining complex on the edge of town. Jake immediately prepared to join the rescue effort despite the dangerous conditions. Vex watched from his wheelchair as Jake gathered emergency equipment and headed for his truck. Something inside the Lupin warrior awakened at the sight of his caretaker rushing toward danger. For the first time since his injury, Vex felt the familiar surge of protective instinct that had made him a legendary fighter. But this time the feeling was directed toward protecting Jake rather than defeating enemies. Jake paused at the door when he realized Vex was trying to follow him. The storm was too dangerous for someone in a wheelchair, and the rescue site would be impossible to navigate, but Vex insisted on coming anyway. He could coordinate rescue efforts and provide tactical advice even if he could not physically help dig people out of the mud. They drove through torrential rain toward the mining complex, while Vex studied maps and planned the rescue operation. His military training took over as he calculated the most efficient ways to reach trapped survivors. Jake listened to his suggestions and relayed them to the other rescue teams by radio. For the first time in months, Vex felt truly useful. The rescue took most of the night, but everyone was saved thanks to Vex's strategic planning. He had identified the safest approach routes and predicted where secondary collapses might occur. His wheelchair could not navigate the muddy terrain, but his mind was as sharp as ever. The colonists who had viewed him with suspicion began to see him as a valuable member of their community. During the drive home, Jake was exhausted and emotionally drained from the rescue effort. Vex found himself studying the human's face in the dim light from the dashboard. This small, weak creature had risked his life to save people he barely knew. He had also spent months caring for an alien warrior who could offer nothing in return. Such selflessness was incomprehensible by Lupin standards. When they finally reached the house, Jake collapsed into his chair, still wearing muddy clothes from the rescue. Vex maneuvered his wheelchair closer and for the first time spoke a word in human language that he had been practicing in secret. "Thank," he said in his deep, gravelly voice. The word came out awkward and heavily accented, but the meaning was clear. Jake looked up in surprise. Vex had never attempted human speech before. The Lupin warrior continued in his broken English mixed with gestures. "Thank you," he said more clearly. "Thank you for life. Thank you for care. Thank you for showing Vex new way of strength." The moment marked a fundamental change in how Vex saw their relationship. Jake was not just his caregiver or his captor. He was something that had no equivalent in Lupin culture, but came close to what humans called family. The concept of chosen. Bonds based on mutual care rather than blood or pack. Hierarchy was revolutionary too. Vex's understanding of social structures. Jake smiled and reached out to pat Vex's massive shoulder. "You're welcome, big guy," he said. "We take care of each other here. That's what families do." The word family echoed in Vex's mind as he processed its meaning. He had been born into a military unit and trained to follow orders. But this human had chosen to care for him without any obligation or benefit. Over the following weeks, Vex began using more human words and phrases. His pronunciation improved and Jake helped him learn basic grammar. But more importantly, Vex started thinking of Jake using a Lupin term that roughly translated to pack leader or alpha father. In his mind, Jake had become the head of a very unusual pack that included one broken Volf and one determined human farmer. The other colonists noticed the change in both of them. Jake seemed less tired and stressed now that Vex was actively participating in colony life. Vex had lost much of his angry desperation and gained a sense of purpose beyond his former military glory. They worked together as a team in ways that surprised everyone, including themselves. When Amy finally finished the basic frame for Vex's exoskeleton, she found him in the workshop trying to help with the final assembly. His mechanical knowledge was limited, but his enthusiasm was infectious. For the first time since his crash, Vex was looking forward to the future instead of mourning his past. Jake had given him something more valuable than mobility or medical care. He had given him hope and a new definition of what it meant to be strong. Amy's exoskeleton was ready for testing 6 months after Vex's crash. The mechanical frame looked like armor made of silver metal and glowing power cells. It was designed to support his damaged spine and give strength to his paralyzed legs. When she first strapped him into the device, Vex felt like a warrior again for the first time since his injury. The first steps were clumsy and uncertain. The exoskeleton responded to nerve signals from his upper body and translated them into movement below his waist. Vex gripped the support rails as servo motors whined and hydraulics hissed. His massive frame rose from the wheelchair and took one shaky step forward. Jake watched with proud tears in his eyes as his friend learned to walk again. Training with the exoskeleton took weeks of patient practice. Vex had to relearn basic movements like walking upstairs and sitting down. The device was powerful but delicate. Too much force would damage the servos, and too little would not provide enough support. Amy fine-tuned the settings while Vex pushed himself harder than anyone thought safe. Jake worried that Vex was overdoing the rehabilitation, but the Lupin warrior was determined to regain as much mobility as possible. His military discipline served him well during the long hours of physical therapy. Every small improvement felt like a victory after months of helplessness. Being able to stand and look Jake in the eye again meant everything to him. The colony supply ship arrived in late summer, bringing new settlers and equipment. Among the passengers was Jake's teenage daughter Kate, who had come to spend a year helping with the farm. She was 17 years old with her father's brown hair and stubborn personality. Kate had heard about Vex in letters, but seeing a giant Volf alien in person was still shocking. Vex was practicing with his exoskeleton in the yard when Kate first arrived. She stepped out of her father's truck and froze when she saw him. 8 feet of gray fur and mechanical armor was not something you encountered every day. Vex noticed her fear and carefully sat down in his wheelchair to appear less threatening. His yellow eyes watched her with gentle curiosity rather than predatory interest. Jake introduced them, carefully explaining that Vex was family now and completely safe. Kate nodded politely but kept her distance for the first few days. She had grown up hearing stories about Lupin raiders and slave ships. Accepting one as a member of her family would take time and patience. The breakthrough came when Kate was trying to repair a broken water pump that controlled irrigation for the southern fields. She had inherited her father's mechanical skills but lacked experience with complex systems. Vex rolled his wheelchair over and offered to help. His military training included basic engineering, and he quickly identified the problem. Working together, they fixed the pump in half the time it would have taken Kate alone. Vex's large hands were surprisingly gentle with delicate components, and his knowledge of alien technology provided useful insights. Kate began to see past his intimidating appearance to the intelligent person underneath. They started spending time together in the workshop, learning from each other. Vex found himself enjoying Kate's company in ways that surprised him. She treated him like a favorite uncle rather than a dangerous predator. Her questions about his homeworld and military service helped him process memories that had been painful since his injury. Talking about his past as a respected warrior made him feel valued again. Kate learned to help Vex with his exoskeleton maintenance and physical therapy. She was fascinated by the technology Amy had created and suggested several improvements to the control systems. Her fresh perspective and youthful enthusiasm motivated Vex to push himself even harder during rehabilitation sessions. One evening, raiders attacked the outer farms hoping to steal livestock and equipment. The colony's security forces were spread too thin to cover all the scattered homesteads. Jake joined the defense effort while Kate and Vex stayed home to protect the main farm. This was Vex's first real test as a defender of human lives rather than a conqueror. The raiders approached Jake's property just after midnight. Vex was wearing his exoskeleton and positioned himself between the house and the most likely attack route. Kate stayed inside with a rifle and kept watch through the windows. When the first raider appeared in the moonlight, Vex felt his old combat instincts awakening, but something was different this time. Instead of the cold fury that had driven him through countless battles, Vex felt protective determination. He was not fighting to destroy enemies, but to defend his new family. The distinction mattered more than he expected. This was not about conquest or glory, but about keeping Jake and Kate safe. The fight was brief but intense. 3 raiders with military equipment faced one partially disabled Lupin warrior in experimental armor. Vex's tactical knowledge and superior strength quickly turned the battle in his favor. His exoskeleton allowed him to move with deadly grace despite his spinal injuries. Within minutes, all 3 attackers were down. Kate rushed outside when the shooting stopped and found Vex sitting heavily in his wheelchair. The exoskeleton had taken damage during the fight and several systems were failing. But he was alive and the raiders were defeated. She helped him out of the damaged armor while praising his courage and skill. When Jake returned from the main battle, he found Vex and Kate working together to repair the exoskeleton. His daughter was chattering excitedly about the fight while Vex listened with amused patience. The sight of them working as a team filled Jake with warmth and pride. His unusual family was becoming stronger with each challenge they faced. The next morning, Vex struggled to find words for what he was feeling. The fight had awakened something beyond his old warrior instincts. Protecting Jake and Kate felt more important than any military victory he had ever achieved. These humans had given him purpose. Beyond personal glory or species loyalty, he practiced the phrase several times before speaking. When Jake brought his morning meal, Vex looked up with serious yellow eyes. "Thanks a million, boss, Dad," he said, in his careful English. "You teach this old Volf what pack really means. You give Vex new reason for strength." The words came from deep in his heart, where old concepts of honor were transforming into something entirely new. Jake had become more than a caregiver or friend. He was the alpha of their strange little pack, and Vex was proud to follow his lead. The title Boss Dad captured both respect and affection in a way that pure Lupin terms could not express. Jake smiled and gripped Vex's massive shoulder. "We're family now, big guy. That's what families do for each other." The word family had become sacred to Vex. It represented bonds stronger than blood or military oath. It meant choosing to care for others without expectation of reward. Kate joined them for breakfast, and the three of them planned the day's work together. Vex would help with equipment maintenance while his exoskeleton was being repaired. Kate would handle the irrigation systems and Jake would check on the livestock. They moved through their routines with the easy cooperation of people who truly belong together. The damaged exoskeleton was fixable, but Amy warned that it might not survive another serious fight. Vex nodded, understanding that his days as a combat warrior were limited. But he had found something more valuable than battle glory. He had found a family worth protecting and a home worth defending. That was a different kind of strength than anything the Lupin military had ever taught him. The Lupin warship appeared in orbit around Haven's Rest without warning on a cold morning in early winter. Its dark hull blotted out part of the sky as it hung there like a metal storm cloud. Jake was feeding livestock when the shadow fell across his farm. He looked up and felt his blood turn to ice. Everyone on the colony knew what Lupin warships meant. Colony. Alarms began wailing across the settlement as people ran for emergency shelters. Jake rushed back to the house where Vex was working on equipment maintenance in the workshop. The warrior looked up when Jake burst through the door with panic in his eyes. Through the window they could both see the massive ship floating overhead like a promise of destruction. Vex knew immediately why they had come. Word of his survival had somehow reached the Lupin Coalition. His former commanders would demand answers about his failure and disgrace. In Lupin culture, a warrior who could not fight was supposed to die with honor rather than become a burden. By accepting human care, he had violated every principle his people held sacred. Within an hour, a shuttle landed near the colony center. 6 Lupin warriors in full combat armor emerged from the craft. They moved with deadly precision toward Jake's farm, following sensor readings that had located their missing comrade. At their head walked Captain Kira Bloodmoon, who had served as Vex's second in command for many campaigns. Kira was smaller than Vex, but no less dangerous. Her black fur was marked with silver scars from dozens of battles. Her amber eyes burned with the cold fury of a professional killer. She had come to Haven's Rest with orders from the Coalition High Command. Bring Vex home for trial or execute him for dishonoring their species. Jake grabbed his rifle and positioned himself between the approaching warriors and his house. Kate stood beside him with her own weapon ready. They both knew they could not defeat 6 Lupin soldiers in a straight fight, but they would not surrender Vex without resistance. He was family now, and families protected each other no matter the cost. Vex emerged from the house wearing his damaged exoskeleton and moving slowly on mechanical legs. A sight of him shocked Kira more than she expected. Her former commander looked smaller somehow despite his mechanical aids. The proud warrior she had followed into battle was gone. In his place stood a creature dependent on alien technology. Just to walk, the confrontation began with formal challenges spoken in the Lupin military language. Kira demanded that Vex explain his disgraceful survival and shameful dependence on human charity. By Lupin law, he should have chosen death over such weakness. His continued existence was an insult to every warrior who had fallen with honor. Vex replied calmly using human words mixed with his native tongue. He explained that the humans had saved his life without asking permission. He had learned new definitions of strength and honor during his recovery. Physical weakness did not mean spiritual failure. Accepting help was not shameful when given freely by those who cared. These concepts were impossible for Kira to understand. Lupin society was built on individual strength and dominance hierarchies. The weak served the strong or died trying to prove themselves. Cooperation without clear benefit was unknown in their culture. Vex's words sounded like madness or cowardice. Jake stepped forward despite the obvious danger and spoke directly to Kira in simple human language. He explained that Vex had become part of their family through choice rather than obligation. The alien warrior had proven his value many times through wisdom and courage. His physical limitations did not diminish his worth as a person. Kira listened with growing confusion and anger. These humans were defying Lupin authority and protecting a dishonored warrior. Such behavior violated every rule of interspecies relations. Humans were supposed to be weak prey animals who submitted to superior predators. But these creatures showed no fear despite facing impossible odds. The tension escalated when Kira revealed the true purpose of her mission. The Lupin Coalition had decided to claim Haven's Rest as a forward military base. The small human colony would be relocated or enslaved depending on their cooperation. Vex's presence here was merely a convenient excuse to begin the occupation. This revelation changed everything for Vex. His people were not just threatening him, but planning to destroy the home and family he had found among the humans. Jake and Kate would become slaves or casualties in a war they had not started. The colony that had welcomed him despite his species would be crushed under Lupin boots. For the first time since his injury, Vex felt the full fury of his warrior nature returning, but this time it was directed against his own kind rather than alien enemies. He stood as tall as his exoskeleton would allow and spoke with the voice of command that had once led armies into battle. He formally renounced his military rank and declared Jake Martinez to be his pack leader. The words hit Kira like physical blows. A Lupin warrior could not simply choose new loyalty based on personal preference. Pack bonds were determined by birth and military service. Vex's declaration was not just impossible but actively treasonous according to Coalition law, but Vex continued speaking with growing confidence and strength. He described how Jake had cared for him when he was helpless and how Kate had accepted him as family. He explained the human concepts of chosen bonds and mutual support. These aliens had shown him forms of strength that Lupin culture could not imagine. Jake and Kate flanked Vex as he spoke, forming a protective formation that spoke louder than words. They were prepared to fight and die for their unusual family member. 3 individuals from different species and backgrounds, united by something stronger than blood or military oath. Kira found herself wavering for the first time in her military career. She had expected to find a broken warrior ready for honorable death. Instead, she discovered a creature who had found new purpose and meaning among aliens. The bond between Vex and his humans was obviously real and powerful. The other Lupin soldiers grew restless as the confrontation dragged on without violence. They had come expecting a simple execution or capture mission. Political discussions and philosophical debates were not their specialty. Several of them began suggesting that they complete their orders by force, but Kira held them back while she studied the strange family group before her. Something about their unity reminded her of the pack bonds that Lupin culture claimed to value. These humans and their adopted warrior showed the kind of loyalty that military training tried to create but rarely achieved. The moment of decision came when reinforcements arrived from both sides. More Lupin shuttles descended from the warship, while human colonists emerged from hiding to support Jake's family. The peaceful farm became a potential battlefield as two species prepared for war. Vex stepped forward one final time and spoke words that would echo through both cultures for generations to come. He looked directly at Kira and said in perfect Lupin military language that he chose his pack freely. Jake Martinez was his alpha and leader by right of care and sacrifice. Any attack on his chosen family would be met with all the strength he could still command. Then he switched to human language and looked back at Jake with eyes full of gratitude and determination. "Thanks a million, boss dad," he said clearly so everyone could hear. "You teach old Volf new way to be strong. Now Vex protect Pack with everything he has left." The declaration sent shockwaves through both groups. Humans had never heard such fierce loyalty from an alien warrior. Lupins had never witnessed one of their own choosing bonds based on love rather than dominance. The impossible had become reality on a small farm at the edge of known space. The Lupin war fleet arrived 3 days later, filling the sky with dark metal shapes that blocked out the sun. 12 massive warships took positions around Haven's Rest, while smaller fighters swarmed through the atmosphere like angry insects. The peaceful farming colony had become the center of an interstellar crisis that could spark war between two species. Admiral Rex Ironhide commanded the fleet from his flagship. He was an old warrior with gray fur and scars that told stories of 100 battles. The Admiral had received reports about Vex's betrayal and the human colony's defiance. Such challenges to Lupin authority could not be allowed to stand without response. Jake stood in his farmyard watching the enemy ships overhead while Vex practiced with his exoskeleton nearby. The mechanical armor had been repaired, but everyone knew it would not survive serious combat. Kate worked frantically with Amy to set up defensive positions around the colony. The humans were badly outnumbered, but they refused to surrender their friend and family member. Captain Kira found herself caught between duty and growing doubt. She had spent 3 days observing Vex interact with his human family and could not deny the strength of their bonds. The warrior she had once followed into battle had found something among these aliens that Lupin culture could not provide. But military orders were absolute and personal feelings could not override duty. The first attack came at dawn when Lupin fighters strafed the outer farms to demonstrate their power. Buildings exploded and crops burned while terrified colonists ran for shelter. Jake grabbed his rifle and headed for the defensive positions, but Vex caught his arm with one massive hand. The alien warrior looked at his human friend with yellow eyes full of determination and sadness. He knew this battle could only end one way unless something changed dramatically. The humans were brave, but they could not defeat a Lupin war fleet with small arms and farming equipment. Vex had to find another solution before everyone he cared about was killed. He activated his exoskeleton and walked slowly toward the landing zone where Kira waited with her assault troops. Jake and Kate followed despite his protests. They would not let their family member face danger alone, even if it meant certain death. Their loyalty gave Vex strength as he prepared for what might be his final act as a warrior. Kira watched him approach with mixed emotions. Part of her wanted to complete her mission and restore proper order, but another part admired the courage it took for a disabled warrior to walk calmly toward overwhelming force. Vex moved with dignity despite his mechanical aids, and the humans beside him showed no fear. When they were close enough to speak without shouting, Vex made an offer that surprised everyone. He challenged the Lupin fleet to single combat with himself as champion of Haven's Rest. If he won, the humans would be left in peace. If he lost, they could take him and the colony without further resistance. It was an ancient form of trial that even Admiral Ironhide would have to respect. The Admiral's laughter echoed across the battlefield when Kira relayed the challenge. A crippled warrior in mechanical armor wanted to fight the best champions of the Lupin military. It was either madness or desperation, but it would provide entertainment before the final conquest. He accepted the challenge and selected 3 of his finest soldiers to face Vex. But Vex had one more surprise for his former commanders. He removed his exoskeleton and set it aside, leaving himself in his wheelchair. If he was going to fight for his chosen family, he would do it with whatever strength remained in his natural body. The gesture shocked both humans and Lupins, who could not understand why he would handicap himself further. Jake tried to protest, but Vex explained his reasoning in words that cut through all the noise and confusion. He had learned from humans that true strength came from protecting others regardless of personal cost. His mechanical aids were tools, but his heart and mind were what mattered most in this fight. The first Lupin champion approached with weapons drawn, expecting an easy victory over a disabled opponent. But Vex had spent months learning to compensate for his limitations through strategy and determination. He used his wheelchair as both shield and weapon, while his military experience guided every move. The fight was brutal and desperate, with Vex using every trick he had learned during decades of combat. His upper body was still incredibly strong, and his tactical mind remained sharp as ever. When the first champion fell, the crowd of watching Lupins grew quiet with respect for their former comrade's skill. The second and third champions attacked together, hoping to overwhelm Vex through numbers. But Jake and Kate had not remained passive observers. They joined the fight despite protests from both sides, using their knowledge of Vex's capabilities to support his efforts. The three of them worked as a perfect team, with each member covering the other's weaknesses. Captain Kira watched the battle with growing understanding of what Vex had been trying to tell her. The bond between these three fighters was stronger than any military unit she had ever seen. They moved together like parts of a single organism, united by genuine care rather than fear or duty. When the last champion fell, Admiral Ironhide faced a choice that would define both species' future. Ona demanded that he accept the results of single combat and withdraw his fleet. But Lupin pride rebelled against being defeated by a crippled warrior and two human farmers before the Admiral could make his decision. Kira stepped forward and announced her own choice. She formally resigned from the Lupin military and requested asylum with the human colony. Her years of service meant nothing compared to the truth she had witnessed. Real strength was not about dominating others, but about caring for them. Other Lupin soldiers began laying down their weapons as Kira's example spread through their ranks. Not all of them could abandon their culture completely, but many chose to question orders that would destroy innocent families. The unity between species became stronger than the divisions that had seemed absolute. Admiral Ironhide retreated with the remnants of his fleet rather than face a mutiny among his own troops. The battle was over, but the real victory belonged to ideas rather than weapons. Vex had proven that strength could take many forms and that family bonds transcended species barriers. In the aftermath, Jake helped Vex back into his wheelchair while Kate retrieved his damaged exoskeleton. The three of them were exhausted and injured but alive. They had defended their home and their values against impossible odds through courage and cooperation. Kira approached them slowly, with her amber eyes showing emotions that Lupin warriors were not supposed to feel. She knelt beside Vex's wheelchair and spoke in their native language before switching to careful human words. She asked for permission to learn what they had discovered about different forms of strength. Jake welcomed her with the same quiet acceptance he had shown Vex months earlier. Their unusual family was growing again as former enemies became friends through mutual respect and understanding. The farm that had started as a refuge for one broken warrior was becoming a bridge between entire species. Years later, when visitors asked about the strange alliance between humans and Lupins on Haven's Rest, they heard the same story from multiple sources. It began with one human farmer who refused to abandon an injured enemy and one alien warrior who learned to accept help without shame. Vex still used the same phrase that had become famous throughout both cultures. Whenever someone asked about the secret of their success, he would smile and point toward Jake working in his fields. "Thanks a million, boss dad," he would say in his careful English. He teach old Volf that strongest pack is one that chooses to care for each other. The words had become more than gratitude or affection. They represented a new way of thinking about strength and family that was spreading across the galaxy, one friendship at a time. The unbroken Volf had found his pack among the stars and taught two species that love was stronger than conquest.